Okay, now spring is well underway in Ukraine, and after a period of stalemate in the war, there are green shoots of optimism now. US and UK military aid packages have been approved, and as a much smaller contributor, Australia's put up another $100 million. Deputy Prime Minister Richard Marles announced this on a surprise weekend visit to Ukraine. Kateryna Argyrou is with the Australian Federation of Ukrainian Organisations, and we caught up with her a little earlier. Kateryna Argyrou, welcome back to the program. Now, Richard Marles, the Deputy Prime Minister and Defence Minister, made his weekend visit to Ukraine, I think marking the most senior visit by an Australian government figure in more than a year now. I see that your organisation, Kateryna, has said that it has faith that his visit will have further sharpened his understanding of what's on the line in this struggle. Do you believe that that understanding had been lost a little on the part of the Australian government in recent times?
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you today. It certainly is a pleasure to welcome the latest announcement of Australian government aid for Ukraine. We were incredibly happy and just delighted to see that Minister Marles took the time to visit Ukraine. We didn't lose hope that the Australian government would continue to stand with Ukraine and continue to support Ukraine, but we have been, as a community, advocating and actively advocating for more and increased military aid, just because we know how difficult the situation is on the ground. We have, my entire family, for example, is in Ukraine. I have relatives on the front line. Many of our community members, unfortunately, have lost their sons and husbands in the fight for Ukraine's freedom and democracy. So we really feel it firsthand. That's why we've been advocating for this aid. And it was wonderful not only to see Minister Marles in Ukraine, but to see our newly appointed ambassador, Ambassador Paul Lehman, also with him. So we hope that the embassy in due course will be reopened in Kyiv. But yeah, as I said, we are extremely delighted at the aid provided.
Just on that embassy, the hoped for reopening on your part at least of an embassy in Kyiv, is that the next logical instalment that you look for from the Australian government, and do you remain hopeful that that might happen soon?
We remain extremely hopeful. I hope that this visit demonstrated how important it is to have eyes and ears on the ground. There is absolutely no replacement for the intelligence that can be gathered, the feedback that can be provided from the ground in Ukraine. Having an embassy working there and fully opened, I think, will only serve Australia in Australian interests and provide the necessary feedback. The next logical thing that we'll be asking for and advocating for, and this was something that we mentioned at the National Press Club when Richard Marles was in attendance, is we're hoping that the Australian government will consider providing a line item in the budget specifically for Ukraine aid. It is important to ring-fence this budgetary line item for Ukraine, just because we've seen hesitancy from defense in providing military aid because it comes out of the current defense budget. So having a separate line item for Ukraine, I think, would be the next logical step and something that we will be advocating for.
Okay, understood. Kateryna, why don't we just run a ruler over the $100 million in new military assistance, I guess, to assess its quality. Australia has been criticised before, not by Ukraine, but by other commentators, for getting old or obsolete equipment. Does the new package, which includes helmets, inflatable boats and boots, does it meet the needs and the quality of military equipment required by Ukrainian forces?
I think what this latest package shows is that Minister Marles' office and Australia has been listening in terms of what's really critically needed at this point in time. Not only are there helmets and inflatable boats, the most important thing is that this latest package includes air defense. It includes drones. And it may not be evident in the news headlines because Ukraine has unfortunately slipped from the news headlines, but over 100 kamikaze drones, missiles, and anything that flies and destroys has been currently targeted at Ukraine, on average 100 per day. So the civilian population is suffering immensely. There's obviously very heated and fierce battles on the front line with a lack of ammunition and a lack of people. So having air defense in this latest package will be extremely useful. And also the war has turned into a drone war. We as a community have supplied over 100 drones through the Defend Ukraine appeal and continue to do so. It's incredibly important for surveillance and reconnaissance. So having drones included in this latest package will also be incredibly useful on the front line, and I think it's a very well-structured package.
It's also timely, I guess, as you make that argument here, Kateryna, because it fits in with the US approving and releasing massive military aid, including air defence missile systems, when the Senate cleared it in Washington, D.C. last week. Do you think that adds to the confidence that momentum on the battlefield can actually be regained by Ukrainian forces?
We're in touch with frontline troops on a daily basis. Not only do we know how difficult the situation is on the front line, we know what a huge boost in morale it was when the package was passed in the U.S. We saw what effect it had on the front line in terms of actually recognizing that the most critically needed items will soon be delivered when the UK announced its package. So I think Australia is acting in lockstep with partners, and there is a clear recognition that Ukraine's partners can and should do more. So we are extremely glad that Australia is following this path and providing that strategic assistance.
Okay, and just one more, if we can, Kateryna, not on equipment and aid, but actually endeavours by the Ukrainian government itself to mobilise more fighting-aged Ukrainians in general, but men in particular. We saw and discussed on the programme last week a suspension of consular services for predominantly Ukrainian men abroad if they're aged between 18 and 60. I'm wondering, through your network of contacts here and elsewhere, whether that has mobilised or...
Not legal for Australians to go and fight in a foreign war, but we've had people from Australia as well as the Ukrainian community reach out asking how they can do it. So in terms of the announcement of suspending consular services, this war is something that affects all and every Ukrainian. So if we stick together and have some sort of united effort, then we actually have a chance at winning. It's not about only the Ukrainians that are in Ukraine, it's Ukrainians that are abroad as well. We are all working like little ants and trying to do every little bit that we can to support Ukraine's victory, and hopefully more people, and there is certainly a shortage of personnel on the front line. We hear that feedback on a daily basis. So we really do need all the support and all the effort that can be provided, whether it's internally in Ukraine or from abroad.
So we're talking about Ukrainians who might choose to return to go home to aid the war effort here, Kateryna. But what about the many, and I'm not sure of the number, but the very large number of Ukrainians who came on temporary visas to flee the war? What's their status in Australia? What sort of inquiries are you receiving?
So the official number provided by DFAT is that we currently have 11,500 Ukrainians that have been displaced by the war that have found refuge in Australia. Most of those Ukrainians have come in on temporary visas for a 3-year period, and they are nearing expiry. So we are receiving many calls on a daily basis as the AFUO asking what is the status and has there been any sort of resolution, whether the visas will get extended, whether there will be additional visa pathways to permanent residency. I'd just like to remind the audience that 70% of the Ukrainians displaced by Russia's war that have arrived on Australian shores are women and children. So these are women trying to secure school places for their children, trying to make sure that they have some sort of stability and normalcy in their life. So there's a lot of anxiety around what will happen if they have to be uprooted once again, deported or sent back. Now, we've been assured by the immigration minister, Minister Giles, that there is a solution coming, but that is just one point of uncertainty and anxiety currently in the community. So we look forward to working with the Australian government to finding a solution to that as well.
No, thanks for flagging it, Kateryna. And if we get an opportunity on this program or elsewhere, we'll try and get some firmer commitments from Mr. Giles if that's possible. Kateryna Argyrou, thanks again for joining us.
Thank you very much, Greg.